open us in prayer, and then we'll jump into today. I'm going to mute Paul for a second because he's in a hotel. So
Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to mute you for a second, Paul,
Yeah,
while we pray.
that's good.
Okay. So, Father, we thank you for this opportunity to once again be together. And Lord, we ask that as we look at this idea of process improvement and looking at areas that we can be responsible to step in and maybe give some leadership and some insight into our organizations, that you would be with us this day. Lord, we thank you that we have the opportunity to gather from all parts of the world together here using electronics and media, and just pray that you would be with all of the electronics and internets and everything that's going on, and that you would be ultimately glorified. So I thank you for this group. I pray blessings on them and their continued studies this week. And may you just be glorified in all that we say and do today. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So in just a moment, I will turn things over to Dr. Paul Bentley. He's actually my manager, my boss here at Boise State. He's going to kind of share a little bit of his story, talk a little bit about process, continuous process improvement, how he's used it. And my hope for today is that as he kind of walks you through this, that you'll be able to start thinking a little bit about your own organizations, and are there areas within your organization that maybe there's a constraint, maybe there's something that you need to go back and look at, evaluate it, look at it and say, can we change this? Can we make it better? And I believe that Paul is a great, he's an expert on this, but even more so, I think he's just a great resource for us. He teaches this here at the University at Boise State. He teaches it to a lot of organizations, both within our community, government, nonprofit. So I think he'll be a real good resource for us. He's traveling today, and he could not get his computer hooked up to the internet at the hotel. So he's in the hotel business center. So there's a little bit of noise in the background periodically. But from there, Paul, I'm going to unmute you and let you take it and go for it. So thank you so much for jumping in, even from northern Idaho.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Yeah. So I'm actually up here today in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which if you've ever been there is one of the most beautiful spots in the world. And I'm here for a graduation for the Idaho Department of Lands, who happens to be one of those groups. They have a succession planning cohort, about 12 to 14 people every 2 years. And they learned this process, and the last report, the group that's graduating today, we teach them this process in a problem-solving process. They go out and kind of apply it to real-life problems in their department. And last year they saved about $1.5 million just because they were able to apply this to some of the processes they do. So it's kind of exciting when you see that happen. I haven't heard that today they're going to report out all of the findings for this new cohort, and we'll graduate them. But I'm looking forward to kind of getting to know everybody. I know Bill, and we've talked a little bit, but I see Jeremy and Tim. You guys mind introducing yourselves? Let's start with Jeremy Maines. He's muted there. There he goes.
Cool. Yeah, my name is Jeremy Maine. I'm the Director of Field Education at Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. So about a year ago, we got a grant to completely overhaul our field education program, which is internships. It's all of the in-context practical experiences students are supposed to go through as a part of their professional training at the seminary. I'm also an adjunct instructor, so I teach in education and community development as those courses are offered sporadically, I guess.
Super. Okay. And is it Tim?
Yeah, I can say hello. Hi, my name's Tim Figley, and I'm from Ohio. I work as I'm an ICF certified coach, professional certified coach at ICF. So I do some executive coaching. I also do a lot of group facilitation, strategic planning facilitation, and some other team and leadership development, mostly with small organizations, churches, nonprofits here in Ohio and in Western Pennsylvania. And this is my first doctoral class with Bakke.
Oh, great. Great. Hope it's a good one. Good experience.
Thank you.
Super.
Yeah.
Now, is there anybody else? I don't see anybody else on.
Yeah. There's two more. Go ahead, Hubert.
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Hubert from Guyana. I'm coming from an engineering background, civil engineering background, and I currently work at help with the management of a landfill site here in Guyana, in the capital. It provides support to disposal facilities for the capital city as well as the one of the main regions within the country.
Great.
Hi, I'm Erisa Mutabazi. I'm from Kigali in Rwanda. I serve with Hope International. I support country teams in Africa. I have a regional role. We are a micro enterprise organization, so we provide microfinance and support churches to start saving and credit associations within their congregations. I am also a minister with the Anglican Church.
Are you with the Rwandan Anglican group?
Yes, the Rwandan Anglican Church.
Super. That's where I was. I was a part of that group for a few years. So great.
Oh,
awesome.
Have you? Good.
So we have Hubert. And Hubert, you're an engineer, is that correct? You said? I'm writing this down.
Yes, I am. Civil engineer, from a civil engineering background.
Good. Because I do this a lot. As soon as I start hearing people's stories, I try to visualize how this can work. So I'm guessing everybody had a chance to at least go over the book, The Goal, which is an old book. I'm going to give an introduction really quickly. I'll give you an idea of how I kind of fell into this. My name's Paul. I graduated from Northwest Nazarene University, which was actually back then Northwest Nazarene College in 1979, before most of you were born, I guess, except for Bill. And anyway, I graduated with a degree in philosophy and religion. I had a minor in ancient and medieval church history, which is totally applicable to what I do today, or not. Then I got a chance in 2000 to attend Northwest Graduate School of Ministry, which is Bakke now. And I think I was a part of this. That had been the second class, I think, Bill. And it was an exciting time. I hear what you guys are going to get to go through. It a little envious because we were pretty much a group of about 15 or 20 people and we would have John Maxwell for a week, and it was awesome. But it sounds like you guys get to do a little bit of exploration in other communities and that kind of thing. But, from 1976 to 2004, I was a pastor and pastored in Idaho, Washington, and Alaska. Most of that was in Alaska. And so I actually worked in some of the native villages, but we also had a church in Fairbanks. And I was at one time pastoring in Juneau and was doing a church plant in one of the bush communities, flying out on a float plane. And so kind of burned my exciter out in Alaska about, at some point in there. Anyway, when we were in Alaska back in 1995, we had a family situation that came up. My dad got extremely ill and eventually passed away. And we ended up moving to Idaho, where I grew up, and my wife and I, we moved down there without any kind of ministry assignment whatsoever, and eventually ended up planting an evangelical Methodist church. But in that process, I didn't know what to do, so I went out to Micron, which is they do custom manufacturing. They build the little green boards inside your computer, and didn't know what I was doing. Started hand soldering, and then ended up being their global training manager for about 4 years. And we had an international scope there. And this is where I was introduced to the goal and to theory of constraints. The company was growing very, very fast. One of the engineers had gone through theory of constraints training, and he just came up to me one day and he said, "Hey, listen," he said, "I need you to read this book, and you need to create an activity, and I want this taught to all 2,100 employees, top to bottom, everybody who needs to understand the theory of constraints." So with absolutely, a minor in ancient medieval church history, I'm trying to kind of comprehend this concept. As soon as I read the book, and I appreciate it being in the form of a novel, I was jacked up, man. I started seeing places. I kept thinking, man, why didn't I have this when I was a pastor? Well, this applies to so many things. And I began to see everything as a process. And as I began to embrace it, I really began to see, in the manufacturing world, I began to see some real big differences. One of the things that if you'll remember in the book, I forgot the main character's name. I know Jonah. Do anybody remember the guy's name? Who's the main actor in the process in the program?
Oh, I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, that's okay. Anyway, he in the process in this novel, he's working in this manufacturing group, and when I began to understand what his story was, and they were giving also a soft skills story in the background, we began to apply this at Micron Custom, and in the first month of full application of the theory of constraints, we were able to reduce our WIP inventory that saved us an amount of $1.4 million a month in excess inventory, which is a lot of money. And so it went into people's bonuses, and that was even better. While I was at Micron in 1999, Boise State approached me from the College of Business and Economics and just asked if I would come over and help start a program in leadership. And so I moved over to Boise State. I had no background in the university world. I was working on my dissertation at the time at Bakke, or at Northwest Graduate, and finished it at that time. I graduated in 99 and started the leadership development program there. And was there till 2006. And in 2006, I mean, this is just kind of personal side, but I had a series of events. And some of you guys, as you're going through the academic process, you also have life processes that are going on as well. And this was a life process. I got up one morning, I'd been teaching, and got lost on my way to work, and called my wife and said, something's not quite right here. So the next day I was teaching, I went out to my car, got in my car, and I couldn't remember what town I was in. And it's come to find out I had contracted West Nile virus. And the result of that was that I ended up resigning my position at Boise State at the time. And so for a 2.5-year period, my wife and I decided, while I was trying to recover mentally and physically, we decided to walk across the western United States. And so we did a 1,100-mile walk across the West. That was a neat experience. Did change our lives in a dramatic way. And then in 2008 to 2011, I went to Montana State University. Boise State had some partnership there, so I went to Montana State, and they asked if I'd start a leadership development program there. And I did, and if you'll remember what the economy was like in 2008, it crashed like 2 months after I started the job, and then they phased out the job between then and 2011. It was just gone, and because it was a soft money program. But I taught theory of constraints there. And then, so 2011, went to Yellowstone National Park and did leadership development there. And at Yellowstone, we actually used the theory of constraints to design our programming for all of the participants at Yellowstone. They have 3,500 temporary employees that had to be trained in about a month and a half. And there were certain things that were required, certain topics that were required by the government that had to be taught. And so we use the theory of constraint. Jeremy, this may apply to some stuff you do, to design our entire education program to make sure we had 3,500 people who were getting the stuff they actually needed. and that we were constantly improving the process and saving time, and also not having these oops moments when somebody would get out in the field and find out they had not taken some required class or whatever it might be. So we used it there as well. And then in 2013, I always tell people I kind of burned my exciter out while I was in Yellowstone. I rode snowmobile back and forth to work. Kind of got tired of it's a beautiful place, but really wanted to come back home. So Boise State opened the position I had back in 2013, and I've been there since. Now we're at the Meridian Center. It's the Center for Professional Development. Jeremy and I work together. We have our own little mini campus with 5 classrooms, and we teach leadership, and we have a great time. And it's kind of nice to have two believers who have very similar backgrounds and scope of mission who can teach leadership and have influence people's lives. So that's who I am. And here we go. So let's get into the theory of constraints. Just quickly, I'd like a little feedback. What did you think of the book? And if you didn't get a chance to read all of it, just give me an idea of the portions you did that stuck out and what you liked about it. You just unmute when you want to talk. So. But not everybody at the same time. Jeremy. Hubert.
Hi, good day again, everyone. For me, as I begun to read the book, I haven't gone very far in it, maybe just about 1/3 the way. But as I began to read the book, I myself became very delighted about the whole story nature of the book, the way the book was presented, the materials being presented, and the ease with which it allowed you to begin to understand the whole issue of process improvement. I mean, the guy was in his own life, everything was in chaos and confusion, and then his own eyes began to be open to the fact that, hey, just don't go through the motions of life, know why you're doing what you're doing, and what steps you need to begin to take to efficiently get you there, kind of approach. So that was one of the things that popped out at me.
Good, all right. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Jeremy. I appreciated the interweaving of the kind of personal life of the main character along with his professional life, and trying to see those in dialogue with each other, sometimes clashing. Sometimes I found myself wondering, what is it he's learning on the professional side that's going to start shaping the personal side and vice versa. So that dynamic was, I appreciated it because I think it's real. One thing that stuck out particularly, and it showed up multiple times, I think the first time was just in one of his conversations with Jonah, the temptation to look only at a single department rather than the organization as a whole and how the department fits in it. So when you're thinking about the theory of constraints, when you're thinking about process, especially in higher education, as siloed as it is within any given institution, there are department level processes you need to steward well, but they also happen in a context of a larger process. And you can get every department shined up real nice and still have a malfunctioning system as a whole, and your students feel it. So anyway, as I was I found myself mentally bouncing back and forth between that, but that was one nugget that stuck out with me, or stuck out for me as I read through it.
Good. You know, what's interesting about that, if you think about it, and by the way, just a little side note, when Goldratt wrote the book, one of my friends, coworkers, had a chance to meet him, and Micron received an award for our continuous improvement process from Goldratt Institute. And so the guy that received the award got to talk to him. He said, "I have a question." He was a believer. He said, "I have a question for you." He said, "Why did you name the guru of the story Jonah?" Because I know you probably noticed in the book, and Hubert, I think if you probably have a PDF file, I think Jeremy said, of the version. But anyway, you'll notice he's wearing a yarmulke. And if you ever see any videos of him presenting, he's passed away now. He's got the yarmulke, and he's usually sitting in the back of the room with a cigar about this big around and a cocktail. He's just a very eccentric guy. But with his Jewish background, he said, "I named him Jonah on purpose. I named him Jonah because if you'll remember the story of Jonah, Jonah knew exactly what he was supposed to do and did the opposite almost every time." So he said, "I wanted people to read the book and think, Jonah didn't just become the smart Jonah overnight. He's the guru because he did all of the things wrong, which is also Goldratt's story. But what's interesting about that, Jeremy, is a lot of times we work in isolation. We have to kind of shine up our own silo, but at other times we have to kind of get out of that Abilene paradox. I don't know if you've read the book, but the idea we got to get out of the silo thinking and begin to say, when we're at a faculty meeting or an engineers meeting or whatever it is, and say, we need to look at this process as a whole. The university for us, Jeremy and I, we kind of get a little frustrated sometimes because we want to say, hey, the university, we need to look at our constraints as a whole. We can shine all we want, but if we're shining and the new freshman students not having the experience they need to have because they're not shining at registration. So that's really important that we see this not only as a theory of constraints locally, because I can take this all the way down to applying the theory of constraints to my desktop, but it really applies to a bigger scale. Anybody else have any input from the book?
Yeah, I think, thanks. One thing that's stuck out for me is the pressure that they had at this factory, the pressure to close, the pressure to deliver, how that pressure produced other ripple effects. For Alex's family, of course, there were issues there, but also for the company, even though they worked long hours and tried to do their best to meet the deadlines, but it looks like things are not getting better. There was more pressure, more inefficiency, more delayed deliveries. So I was trying to look at it from the perspective of pressure, and how pressure can be counterproductive as well.
Well, that's true. Edwards Deming, who you'll see at the top of the slide there, so he has there's a YouTube video, and I would encourage you guys to pull it up. If you type in Edwards Deming, red bead, white bead illustration, he gives an illustration of how we get into these organizations and we push and push and push to try to get people to perform. And his whole point is that we're trying to correct people when the real issue is the process. And it's true in every line of work. In ministry, or he said, man, that's how many times have we keep thinking, well, that person was just a little better, or that person had more of this. And the fact is, so much of what we do really is there's so many obstacles in the way for these people to come, for example, to come to Christ, or to whatever our purpose and vision or purpose is at that moment. A lot of times we're just throwing process obstacles in their way. We're making them jump through hoops they don't need to jump through. They're hung up on constraints that don't need to be there. And so that's a good point. You get the focus off of the people and onto the process. So. Anybody else before we kind of dig into this? Well, we'll get into it then. So I like the quote at the top. It's on everything that I teach in continuous process improvement. So Edwards Deming was the father of total quality management. Really, he and a guy named Joseph Juran. A quick history to that is after World War II, Deming and Juran had been shopping this idea of total quality management all over the United States and got no hearing whatsoever. Chrysler hired them to teach some of the principles as consultants, and had them there for 1 month and let them go, and made the comment, we don't really do quality, we build big cars that people want. And that didn't mean much to anybody. Then in World War II, when it was time to do reparation in Japan after the bomb in Hiroshima, the United States had gone over and tried to rebuild businesses. And I think it might have been done tongue-in-cheek, but they said, well, why don't we send Juran and Deming over, and they can do a couple of, why don't we send Juran and Deming over, and we'll just have them teach a couple of sessions on continuous process improvement. And so, sure enough, they did, and then nobody really heard from Japan. If you remember, stuff in Japan in the 60s was typically junk. And then all of a sudden in the 70s, you started seeing these little Japanese cars, and then Panasonic, and then they were continuously improving, and they really did. They applied these concepts of quality management to their work. And pretty soon in the 1980s, you have American advertisers with unions standing on television in their red, white, and blue flag and a pair of blue jeans saying, buy American, because people weren't buying American because America was making big stuff, but the quality wasn't much. And so this kind of came to light in the 80s. People said, man, we've got to come up with a better way. So they applied some of Deming's concepts. Well, what happened is Deming's concepts make a lot of sense theoretically, but it wasn't until Goldratt came along and said, here's a 5-step set, and I won't get into how, you can read up on him, but he came up with the kind of a more human approach to the theory of constraints. And so that's just kind of a little background. You can read all you want. I'm gonna bet by the time you get through this class, you've got other classes to think about, and you may not. But if you've got a business or a church, I would really encourage you to read a little bit of background on it because it applies. So I just want to give you an example of a theory of constraint. Now, there are two kinds of charts I would typically use in theory of constraints. One would be a linear chart. If I had a start and a finish. So Department of Lands that I'm working with today, we had a linear chart. We were trying to deal with a scaling operation for logging trucks. And so it was very easy. Our process step starts with when does the logging truck arrive? Step, 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 step. When does the logging truck leave? That's a linear process. But for most of what we do, and especially when I'm listening to you guys in your world, you're going to see a lot of your processes as circular processes, meaning you're going to be dealing with the same people or the same concepts or the same programs over and over again. So I just got one here, pulled one up, an example of going out to eat. I think any of us can relate to that if you've ever gone to a restaurant. And so let's start up at the top, and you'll see. And what we're looking at are these process steps. I call them moments of truth, and that comes from a guy named Jan Carlson, who used to be the CEO of Scandinavian Airlines, and he called these customer service moments of truth. But let's just walk through these. So here, let's kind of imagine your mind. You're with me, and we're sitting around a table after a class at Bakke, and we say, hey, let's go to dinner tonight. And, Arisa says, hey, yeah, I'll call and make a reservation. So he calls and makes a reservation. And the phone rings a couple times, and a lady comes on, and she's very polite. She says, hey, yeah, I can get you guys seated at 6:30. Oh, great. So that's fine. So we all pile into Jeremy's car, or Bill's car, I guess, since he'd be there. And we drive in, and we come up to the parking lot. And as we pull up to the parking lot, we have to circle around about 4 or 5 times before we find a spot to park, which is a good sign, but it's also a moment of truth, because if I want to eat someplace and I can't park, I may not go back and eat there. So it's a moment of truth. It's a step. It's a process step. The next step, they get up to the building, and we all get ready to walk in, and Hubert looks up and said, man, the windows need to be cleaned. There's like fingerprints all over the windows, and we're thinking, man, do we stay or do we go? We think, well, we'll go ahead and give it a shot. We're all guys, so we usually don't really care, because maybe it's the world's best burger or whatever. So we just say, well, we're going to go in there. So we get in and we walk in, and we're greeted right off within about a minute. Somebody comes up and says, how you guys doing? I'm so glad to have you here. We'll be with you in a moment. And then we sit there or stand there for 3 minutes. And we're kind of looking at our watches, and we're thinking, boy, we got to get back to class pretty soon. What do we want to do? And then they seat us, and it's okay. And then it takes about 5 minutes for the server to come up and take our order. And we all decide, and server's pretty pleasant, pretty friendly. We eat the food, and I'd say on a scale of 1 to 5, it ends up a 3.5. It's not incredibly great. It's not horrible. It's not memorable. It's a 3.5. So we eat our food, kind of look at each other. During that time, you'll see in step 8, we interact a little bit with the server, and she's pleasant. Things are okay. And so the service is pretty nice. We pay the bill. Bill's not much. And then once we pay the bill, we leave. And the question is, at step 10, will I come back? Let me ask you a question. What do you think, if I am the owner of that restaurant, I'm going to be, if you take a snapshot of that picture, what is the one thing I want to have happen after step 10? I'm the owner of the restaurant, and I've taken this as kind of a cue. What do I want to have happen after somebody leaves my restaurant? Anybody?
I would say you'd want the customer to think of returning to the restaurant for starters,
Sure.
and if possible, recommending others.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so what happens is, if I don't have a process, and I don't know what my customers are going through, I have no idea why they're not coming back. So I say to myself, well, I know the problem. The problem is we're not spending enough money on marketing. Or the problem is our prices are too high. Or the problem is that we need to buy cheaper food so we can keep our prices low. We come up with all these reasons. We have no idea until we go out and get a pulse of the customer to find out what the pain points are. So if you think of these moments of truth, these are all moments where I'm kind of making a decision as whether I'm going to go or not. So now let's say that I've done this. I've sent a survey out, a real survey, maybe had a third party do it, and I've had my customers score us in these areas. Just looking at what do you think might come up as the main pain point in that process? Which of these do you think would be the constraint that would keep the customers from coming back? There may be 2 or 3, but let's pick one that you think would bug you the most.
The dirty windows?
Yeah, I think dirty windows, if that's immediate, I tell you what, if my wife was with me, we wouldn't be eating there. We would have already left, right? Jeremy, you were going to say something. What were you thinking?
I frequently make decisions based on how long it's going to take me to get from where I was to actually eating. So arriving at the parking lot, and so that or like amount of time from in the building to service, those 2 time-oriented pieces are usually really important for me.
Yeah. If we're doing consulting, it's interesting when you say that. You take those, let's say we start with 100 customers in the survey, and we have the call for reservation, and you start looking where the fallout, the way I would identify my constraint is the fallout number. At what point do most of the people bail? If I start with 100 people, and I still have 99 at the parking lot, and I lose 5 at the windows, and then I have 10 people turn around, or 15 people turn around because it took them a total of 9 minutes just to get seated. I know that that's my constraint. Someplace in there, 4, 5, 6. I don't know which one. I'm gonna have to observe to figure that out. Now, let's say I've lost 15 people, or 16 people. Now I get to my 84 people at number 7. And I get a 3.5 experience, and I lose 20 people. Now that's probably going to be so we don't really know what the constraint is, but you can see it's probably not just the individual server, which in most organizations that's what they would beat up on. We need more customer service training. Well, servers doing the best they can with the system they have. They may be understaffed. The food may be not high quality, whatever it might be. So in that process, so it's kind of I just want to. I don't know if you had a good nod of the head. I've only got a couple of people up there, but did you kind of get the idea of how that process works and how you would pick it out? Okay, let's do this. We're going to move to one I think all of us are familiar with, and it doesn't look a lot different, but it's Moments of Truth at Church. I worked with a consultant, Bill Bowman, he's since passed, but he was a church consultant, church growth consultant back in the day when that was everything. And I had him come through our church one time. We were pastoring a church on the east side of Seattle, and had him walk through the church and look at the facilities. He said, "Here are a couple of things you don't know, Paul." He said, the person who will make a decision in a family to come back or not come back is the wife. He said, she will make that decision in 2 minutes after coming in. So he said, I'm going to tell you, your constraints right now are your nursery and your women's bathroom. Because if they haven't even got, they don't care about the sermon yet. If they don't, they're not going to leave their kid with a sketchy, person in the nursery, and they're not going to use a dirty bathroom. And so you better make sure. So he kind of walked me through these processes. And so with that in mind, we began to go through our process. And so this is a really generic version of what we pulled together. So I just used step one as somebody recommended by a coworker. You guys looking for a church, maybe you're new to town here. Let me recommend, the church of, whatever. And so we said, well, we're going to go. And I didn't add in there looking through the newspaper or calling or website to try to figure out when this thing starts. But let's say we figured that out. And that sometimes is a constraint. There was a church we had in Alaska that they ran about 15 people. And I used to say they need to change the name of the church that nobody can find is their mission statement, And sometimes that's what we do. We don't. The very first interaction with that church is there's no website, there's no interaction, there's no way to know where they are. So they come and they arrive at the parking lot, and if there's no parking, that's going to be a negative impact. Then they come through and they go to the restroom, and I'm just giving an example. Maybe they go into the building and the wife comes out and says, whoa, man, nobody cleaned the building. But then there's a really nice person out front. They say, hey, we're so glad to have you guys here. And the husband's all geared up and going, this is cool, I'm ready to go, we'll go, this would be awesome. And the whole time the wife is already in her mind shut off, And then they're seated, and they kind of seat them toward the back and, kind of give us that option. And then we sit there, and everybody's talking, and it's really loud, and it's not a very worshipful atmosphere. And you wait, and pretty soon it's 5 after, and there are people up trying to move microphones around, and pretty soon it's 7 after, and then finally 10 after the time to start, they start. Now I'm thinking, geez, do they really care about their guests at all? And then we move in, and the whole time we're in the service, there's a kid screaming in the background, and they can't hear anything, and it doesn't seem like anybody has a remedy for it or an answer for it. Then the preacher gets up and does a really great job with the message. I mean, it's just life-changing. It's, it gives me something I can take back to work. I'm on my way out. A lot of people greet us. They're really friendly. They tell us about some of the program that's going on. And then as we leave, a couple of people say, hey, listen, we'd really like to have you guys come back. And we get in the car, and I'm the husband. I'm like, man, that was a great sermon. It was pretty great. The kids were crying. It was no big deal. And my wife's already decided she's not coming back because she went into a dirty bathroom. So just a question, what do you think is the experience at each step? What do you think's going on in these people's mind? So what I'd like us to do, before we go through this, we're going to break it into pieces. What I'd like you to do is I just want you to take a piece of paper. Hopefully you have a piece of paper and a pencil. And I want you to think about one process. And I think, Jeremy, you said you guys have already identified constraints. Is that correct?
I told them to be thinking about constraints this week.
All right.
To be thinking about a constraint in their organization.
All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually have you guys share a process. So this is your chance to. If I didn't get it all done, I'm going to give you about 3 to 4 minutes to do this. I want you to think about a process in your life. I don't care if it's work, church, school, whatever it might be, and I want you to don't make it more than about 4 or 5 steps. The processes that you go through in that series. You might take if you're Arisa, you might use your church. Hubert, you might make it could be a city council meeting or whatever you deal with. Jeremy, you could always have the beautiful faculty meetings or whatever it might be. Just take a minute and walk through what those steps are. And I'll just give you about 3 minutes to do that. How many would like another minute just to finish this up? If so, just say yes. If not, we'll move on. Okay, so it sounds like we're ready to go. I'm gonna hold mine up the screen. I don't know if you can see this or not, but I just took an example the last night. Well, my wife and I were looking for a hotel. We have, there are quite a few to choose from in Coeur d'Alene. And the first step, these are just really messy, but can you see that, Jeremy?
Oh, no, we can't. You have to share you have to unmute.
Oh, I have to unmute me? Where do I do that right? What do I do here?
I was actually trying to do it for you.
Okay.
I just sent you a
Start my video?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Okay.
Cool.
So here's my old picture here. I don't know if you can see it, but we started off and we tried to get on their internet on their website, and the website wasn't working. So we pulled up to a different hotel, came in, suites, and we walked through the process, and the process all the way through was great. We had some real high moments where they gave us a discount for the room because my wife said we looked like we were senior citizens, and so they gave us a senior citizen discount, all the way through. Now, I had problems with the Wi-Fi. That would probably be the constraint for me, but I think we'd probably return because they've also been very spectacular trying to support us and help us. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It just, you pin it out just to see what's going on. But that would be, my constraint there would be having an easier way to get onto the Wi-Fi. So you can pull me off, Jeremy. What do I need to do?
No, you're fine. Just keep going.
Okay, I just didn't definitely want to see the screen again.
Oh, no, we can see the screen. You're good.
All right. So I don't need everybody to go through every single step of the process, but what I would like each one of you to do is just tell me generally what the theme is of the situation, and then give us the constraint that you identified in that situation. I'll just call on everybody one at a time. Well, Jeremy, we'll start with you, Jeremy Maines or Maine.
Yeah. So I just sketched out quick a staff meeting rather than a faculty meeting.
Sure.
And general process being a reminder is sent ahead of time, entering the room on time, usually an opening devotional, usually various reporting from different departments or department heads. A hoped for but often unfulfilled time of question and answer at the end, and then the ending and the exhortation to watch your email for the next one. I think 2 constraints I identified in that is if the reminder is sent with information to review, it heightens the anticipation that we're actually going to be able to discuss and give input on said issue. But oftentimes Q&A, the issue gets reported to us rather than engaging with us, and the Q&A often is eliminated because reporting runs over, but they want to stick to the ending time because they want to get their administrators back to work.
Oh, all right.
So if one of the goals is you want people to continue to allocate time to this and bring other staff with, those are 2 things that greatly affect the experience and whether or not line staff will return if they're invited, for example.
Good, super. So I would just circle that. You can pick either one. Right now, we don't know which one. You would only want one, though. So, all right, Hubert, do you have one?
Quickly at my end, I just, coming from working in a landfill, I sort of just went through quickly the process we come in. So a customer decides to bring waste to the site. The first thing we do is book it in, what type of waste, where it's coming from, and that gather that sort of data. And we send it to be weighed. Then from that, once it's weighed, we would then move to the area of directed where it needs to go to tip. There's different areas depending on the type of waste we'll have it tip. Once it goes to that tipping area, where for example, where the regular domestic, municipal domestic waste would go, we'll then deal with having it placed and compacted. Once that is completed, we then need to deal with covering it at the end of the day. So that would be our process, so the receipt and then placement and, of waste disposal. In the area where I would see a constraint or an area of constraint we have right now is between that placement and compacting. If, for example, the operators on our bulldozer, on our compactors spread the waste out too much, and then we have a larger area to deal with covering at the end of the day. So we need to sort of confine their operations or the placement of waste that's and then we'll be able to reduce the amount of area we need to be covering at the end of the day.
Excellent. Okay, great. Larissa.
Yeah, mine is a visit to the eye clinic that I did last week.
Great.
I mean, so even on appointment, you come in, you spend about 25 minutes. They're looking for your file, both on the electronic and the hard copy. And then once they have your file, then you go to check your medical insurance, another desk. That will take another 25 minutes. And once they've checked your medical insurance, then they will do they write a prescription form for you. And then after that, you go to do pre-tests that will take quite a long time, maybe an hour. And then after that, you go to see the actual ophthalmologist. And then after that, they write your bill, and then you go to pay for the bill. I think for me, the constraint there was because of a lot of record checking and files and different places, different records, and multiple reviewers of all those records, ended up being a longer process and a kind of sometimes frustrating process.
Good. Excellent. You know, I'm thinking about this, Larissa. We're going to make this super simple so you can apply it to anything as we go through it. You could probably become a consultant to the clinic, you know. Say, hey, listen, I am a consultant. I've been trained in this, and I'm going to take these 5 steps, and I'm going to help you make your process better. When I say that, I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but not really, because I can walk in. I walked into the Department of Labor one time and went back to their manager's desk and said, hey, I'm watching how long it's taking people to get online to find a job, and I think you've got a constraint. I think I can help you. So they ended up hiring us to come in and do it, and it saves them money. I mean, it's amazing what you'll see, and that's why I want to make this. The book's great. The book kind of gets into some of the variations and stuff. I'm just going to keep it really simple for our world, and but that's a great example, Larissa. And Tim, are you there? You have yours.
Yeah, I am.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah. So I do work as a coach and kind of a consultant with different organizations. The one I chose for this class is a landscaping company. And what I wrote down was their marketing process, their sales process, and then their job process as they get started. And we have surveyed their clients or their customers. We've surveyed some of their employees. And where the constraint is on this process is that once a prospective client is either unsure or not ready to get the job started, the proposals go into a file and they rarely get back to the people on time. So then it creates a dissatisfaction. So then their NPS score lowers because, people don't want to recommend them, that type of thing. So up until then, things are usually pretty good. And once they're on the job, things are wonderful. But there is a problem with getting back to people once they are either not ready or not committed, and they need to have follow-up. So their follow-up procedure. And that's because it's all been dependent upon one person to get back to everybody, and he's not been able to. He doesn't have time because he gets distracted with other things.
Wow, excellent. And this is good stuff. Is there anybody else there? Jeremy, I'm not going to make you do one because you're going to say, my boss is my constraint. He keeps saying. I don't know if you have any comment there or not, but is there anybody else? We got everybody, right? Okay, so it's interesting when, Tim, you mentioned that example. I used this with a company in Bozeman. I actually worked for the company and for a while, but the guy he was a friend of mine, and he does the house prep service for Bill Gates' house in Yellowstone Club, which is a bajillion-dollar private club. He's got this big compound up there. Anyway, the guy who owned the business would have to take his workers and all of his supplies, load them up every morning, and drive an hour and a half to the Yellowstone Club to do the cleaning. And so as we went through the process, he was telling me, he said, I have to get up at 4 a.m. to load the van, to get everything ready and to have it ready. And he said, and if we forget something, I have to drive all the way back to Bozeman to get it. So we went through the process, and he decided that period of time in the morning that he was killing was money wasted. So what we did, we went through and exploited, which we're going to get to next, exploited the constraint, and by having a checklist. So that was exploit. And then the second step was we decided to spend a little money and get a storage unit at the very base of Yellowstone Club Hill. And by doing that, everything was there. So if something happened and they forgot something, it was about a 10-minute drive back to the bottom of the hill instead of an hour and a half drive back. So you can kind of see how this works. And Tim, your landscaping is a great example of that. So what we're going to do, we're just going to walk through the 5 steps quickly. Any comments or questions? Hey, Jeremy, can we get back to my screen? Is there anything I need to do there?
Your screen is up, Paul. We're ready to go.
Okay, here we go.
Just keep moving.
We're going to keep moving. We're almost done here, guys. So we did this the church service, and I put the identify the constraint, the weak service link in the process. What is it in the service? Because most of us are dealing with services now. Hubert, you're dealing with something that's very concrete and visual, which it's always a lot easier to do. It's easier to measure time and the spread of the waste and those kinds of things. But we identify the weak link in the service. We exploit the constraint. Now, this to just kind of take the book aside and say, this is how I believe you can use this in your world today. It's how can I improve this constraint without spending money? Now, I will say that when we work with government, this is a brand new concept. They have never, ever thought about how can we. So what they do is they go and hire employees, and then they have no work for them when they don't have the constraint anymore. So this is true. It's true in universities too, Jeremy, by the way. But what happens is this is the gold mine for you guys and for any process you touch on. If you can get a group of people together that are affected by this constraint, and you can come up with brainstorming ideas and how do I improve this without spending a bunch of money, you'll be surprised at the creative energy that comes out of that. Plus, you improve a process by a little bit, and if it's a money process, this is where you start saving the big dollars. When all of a sudden you don't have a bunch of people waiting backlog, or you don't have a bunch of people working late, or you don't have students who are confused, or parishioners who are having to jump through obstacles, or at an eye clinic where I'm filling out 35 forms that could quickly be done one form, you know. So this is, how do I do this? And I haven't spent much money at that point. Once I've done that, then the most important thing I can do is subordinate to the constraint. What subordinate means is, just in simple terms, how can I get everybody else to support this process? How can I get other people to buy into this? So if I have a constraint, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the people in my process, listen, we're all focusing on this constraint. I call it the golden child. It's like, this is the most important thing in our lives right now. This is pure gold. I know your area has problems, and we all need to work on those, but right now we're just focusing on this one. And if you'll remember, I think Alex runs into in a book, it was the guy's name, and Jonah introduces a concept called drum buffer rope. And then and I'm not going to get into that today, but he talks about the Roadrunner process. And the Roadrunner process is the old Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote, that I'm going to train everybody else in that process to say, every time I see the constraint and it needs help, I'm going to go over there because I don't have anything to do because I'm not one of the constraints. I'll come over and help them in any way I can. I might clean up the area, organize it, whatever it might be. Micron, we actually went out, and you guys from other countries may not understand this, but in the old days there was a store called Kmart. And Kmart used to do this thing called a blue light special. And you'd be in the store, and they would have this big flashing blue light on a giant battery on a pole. They'd flip the light on, and everybody would run to the blue light because they were going to sell things for a super cut rate deal. Well, they don't do that anymore, so I went out and bought 19 of the old blue lights from Kmart. So now you can imagine we have 19 lines running, and on those 19 lines that are running, every line was building something different. We put the blue light at the constraint, and it didn't turn it on until the constraint got backed up to a certain point. It would flip on the light, and everybody else in that process knew we come over and we help there. So you have to kind of extrapolate how you can use that. You don't necessarily have to have a blue light, but some kind of an indicator, say, hey, we need help here, the constraint, so we subordinate to the constraint. Step 4 is, now I've done the best I can brainstorming for ways to not spend money. I've got everybody focused on the constraint to improve it. Is it time that we spend some money? Maybe we do need to hire somebody. Maybe we do need to market more. Maybe we do need to add a new software, whatever it might be. But at this step, it's super important to remember that when you elevate that, you throw the entire system into another world. Because if I hire another person, Jeremy knows this, I failed at that theory of constraints. We hired a person to help us out with finance, good person, nice person, and once we kind of got through the constraint problem, we had elevated too quickly, she kind of ran out of stuff to do. She finally retired. And the problem with that too is it added another variation in our process and another person's voice in meetings that may or may not have been necessary. Another person to make sure we invited everything. Another classified employee that I had to make sure was employed. I mean, these kinds of things. So before you elevate, before you go out and spend money on something, ask yourself, what will this do to my system? What's it going to do to my process if I elevate at that point? So that's a really critical question to ask at step 4. And then 5 is you go back to step 1, and that's why it's called continuous process improvement. So we're almost done here, Jeremy. I'm going to just do a real quick, I think I'm going to go past that. So I'm going to give you some questions, and I want you to write the answer to these questions. Jeremy, I don't know how you want to receive these, and I'd kind of like to look at these after. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through these questions, and then we'll be done. you already told me what your constraint was. I'd kind of like you to take a little time after this class, and you could just send these to Jeremy, and I want you to answer these questions. This doesn't have to be a formal paper. I just want to see that you used your brain to apply it to this, because this is going to start affecting. Now that you know this, you're going to see everything in this way. I think most people do. So, what constraint did you identify in your world? What were some exploit ideas? That's what I'm really after. I always figure if I can get to step 2 and get people to think creatively about a solution, this is where the money's made. This is where the process is made. This is where people buy into your journey because they believe in you, because you're serving them and getting crud out of the way for them. You're helping them get what they need. The third one, who would you involve to help identify ways to exploit it? One of the things I found out in manufacturing especially is if we have a constraint in manufacturing, the people I'm going to go to, I might go to the engineer. Hubert, not to offend the engineer, but yeah, sometimes they're kind of back there in the theory world. But I'm definitely going to go to the frontline employee who's experiencing every day. And those are the people who are going to come up with the creative ideas. So who would I involve in identifying that constraint and working with me? I can teach them this on a piece of paper, a napkin, these 5 steps, and tell them what I'm after. Step 4, how would you subordinate other processes to it? Who would you include, and what would you do? Let's say I have Jeremy, let's say we have your staff meeting situation, and you say the constraint is I'm not getting good involvement from those frontline employees because we're not, we want to make a better email. So you say, listen, how could I involve those frontline employees in making this constraint better? Because they're the ones that are being affected by it. And you create buy-in in that way. And then the 5th, it says 6, it should be 5. How do you see yourself using this process in the future? And those are the questions I'd like to get answered from. If you could, let me bring that back. Sorry about that. So this is a 6 question. The 5 questions I'd like you to answer. I guess quality. I need somebody to do quality management on this. So that should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Give everybody a chance to write that down. And Jeremy, with that, you can mute me and you can give instructions. If anybody has questions, I'll just stay online here for a few minutes.
Paul, I thought it might be good. You skipped that process right before this, which was walking them through this with the moments of truth.
Sure.
We have a little bit of time. It might be helpful. Let's make sure they all have these questions before you go back, but it might be helpful to walk them through the moments of truth with these 4 or 5 questions that you just shared with them. Is that what you were planning on doing?
Yeah, that's what I was going to do. I just didn't want to take too much time.
No, I think if you would take maybe 6-7 minutes on that, and then give them a chance for any questions they may have. I know that having taught this, and this is not my wheelhouse 100%. So having taught this material, I know that sometimes the struggle is in the subordination. Like, how do we subordinate this?
Sure.
And so I want to make sure that makes sense to them.
Okay.
So if you'd walk through that, I think that could be helpful for us, and then we can open up for any questions.
All right. And I'm kind of slow on the uptake here with my PowerPoint skills, but so I use the example of the dining, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's just pick one. Let's say that in this situation, we decided that the constraint was that it was taking 3 minutes to get people seated. All right. So that's it. Now, I'm not going to focus on anything else. This is always hard, too, when you're communicating with a team, to help them understand that you're not ignoring their process. They're good people. You're just trying to fix a process. And it takes a lot to get people focused on process and not people. Jeremy and I went through this not too long ago. We were teaching a group, and I was teaching a problem-solving session, and we could not move this group beyond blaming other people. And I ran back to my office afterwards. I was so fired up, and I wrote a 2-page white paper on how kind of the Noah incident. It's so hard for me to get past people and think about processes. So let's say that's our process. So let's play with it a little bit. We're going to exploit the constraint. Let me ask you a question. Anybody can answer this. Who would you pick in a restaurant to help you identify why it's taking so much time to get people seated?
I would say a waiter.
You bet. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
Busboy, are those responsible for clearing the table if that's not the waiter?
Absolutely. Yeah. You might pull a host or hostess in if that was necessary, but you really have the players there, if you notice, and now those players can come in and help and help exploit. So they're the mental power. They see it happening. The manager has got to let go at this point. It's a servant leadership moment to say, you guys are smarter than I am. There's a quote I like to use. Managers are not stupid. They just act intelligent in isolation. It's not that people don't hire you because you're dumb. They hired you because you're smart, but you're never going to be as smart as 2 or 3 people in your team together. So that's important as we go through. So then we get into, Jeremy mentioned the subordinate to the constraint. Well, let's say that we're doing that. And our problem right now, we identify this constraint, the seating time. What are some ways, when there's people backed up for seating time, what are some roles and some ways that a person could... Let's say that we exploit it. We say the issue we find is that we're not getting the tables bussed fast enough. And pretty much we always look at it that the tables being bussed, that's kind of an entry-level job. It's not anybody with authority. But the busser says, hey, man, nobody trained me in this. And so I really don't know how to bus a table. And we say, well, we're going to exploit this by training you on how to bus a table. And we might get some help right off the bat there. So we say, well, yeah, we got that settled. Then the next step is, how would I have these other people on the team subordinate that busser when they're under an overwhelmed? What are some ways that they could do that?
My experience in a restaurant, one way we did it was if tables aren't being cleared, there's often not a backup of dishes yet in the back room. And if there's a dishwasher's assistant, if there's 2 dishwashers, for example, or even 1, we often pull one of the washers to the floor.
Perfect. Yeah.
Clear. And then if things do get settled in, a lot of people get seated at once. Oftentimes, one of the table clearers could go back and help on the dish side if that happened to get back up. So there's a pretty direct relationship between those 2 functions.
Good. Yeah, that's perfect. Sure. So it's a little bit of cross training. And then it's also the road runner where the manager has got to look around and say to the assistant dishwasher, hey, the blue light special, man, we need you out there right now. So anyone else? So that's the idea of subordination, making sure that other people know that when that thing goes down, I use it, the word for it in Japanese manufacturing is called kanban, and all that means is a sign. So one of the things you want when you're subordinating is to have a way to signal to those other people, I need help over here. Now that might just be turning to the manager saying, I need help. It might be, just having a card you hold up in a process or a meeting or whatever that helps it, but it's just a way of indication. So step 4 is when we elevate. And to elevate, typically in a restaurant like that, you'd probably go, well, we need to hire more people to bus tables. Well, let me ask you a question. If I go out and hire another person to bus the table, what's it going to do to my entire system? It'll seat people quicker at that point. Well, what's it going to do? How will that impact the whole line?
I would, if I could comment here, I think, for example, you now have to look at service time, because if people are seated faster, will it then affect the service time? So are the kitchen staff, are they going to be able to serve meals fast enough?
Sure. So I've just pulled I've put another person on the bus tables, but that doesn't really help me with these others, does it? And to think about it, if I hire another person, there are going to be times when they have nothing to do because we're not always backed up. It's also another person running around in a busy restaurant. I mean, you can start seeing what can happen. And so it kind of leads to this next step, which what it's probably going to do, it's probably going to push all of the dishes back to the dishwasher and pile up in the kitchen, which still gets you, now you're short of dishes because you can't keep up with it, and you have a new constraint, which you would go back to step 5. So that's kind of the process. All right.
So Paul, let me ask you this question, and then we'll open it up for any questions that they might have. How have you seen this theory of constraints and ongoing process improvement in a nonprofit world, and then also in a for-profit world? How have you seen companies? I know you've talked a little bit about Idaho Department of Lands and others, but how have you seen organizations use this?
Well, let me pull them. Let's see. Okay, when I was in Fairbanks, we had I oversaw the outreach mission. So I had the prison ministry, food bank, oversaw those areas of the church. And in our food bank, one of the problems is that we would run out of food consistently on certain days of the week. And so what was happening is we had a person who was really good at going out and getting people to give and kind of running campaigns. But when we looked at it as a process, we realized that our constraint was on Thursday afternoons. Usually it was toward the end of pay period type things, that we were running out of certain items and vegetables. So we just got together with the food bank staff and said, listen guys, why are we running out of these items every Thursday? That became the constraint. So we met and said, here's the issue. We have a high demand on those for whatever reason, I don't remember, high demand on those on Thursdays because of payday on Friday. So then to exploit that, what we did is we had that person who was going out and ringing the bell to get everybody to give donations to go to these stores and specifically say, hey, we need what was it, let's say green beans or whatever it is, and we need those urgently. Is there a way that we could just put in an open order to you guys to that we could pick up green beans on Monday and then we would backstock those? And so just without even spending any more money, just having that person refocus their effort on how they were raising money for the food bank or raising food for the food bank, they got really narrow with that focus. Then the way we subordinate, it wasn't really hard to subordinate. Basically, hit a staff of 5, but just told everybody, listen, when the green beans come in, don't distribute more than 1 can per family, and also keep a you call it WIP, I guess, this inventory. Keep an inventory untouched until we see where we are on Wednesday, and then release it. So that's a nonprofit example.
Great.
In a profit world. I would probably say at Micron, one of the things that we discovered is that we were, let me back up. That gets complicated really quickly. I'll use lands, even though it's not a profit. It was similar. So what was happening is when they were bringing these logging trucks in, the Department of Lands, they lease land that gets to private industry. They cut the timber. And then they bring the timber into these logging mills, and what the lands would do then is they would scale the logs to find out how many board feet were in those logs. That's how they knew how much they were going to make off of that land lease. What would happen is I just drove through the little town of Tamarack, and it used to be that when you would drive through this little tiny town, little 2-lane road, you might have 10 or 15 logging trucks backed up onto that highway. So identifying the constraint, we went in and said, okay, here are the 5 steps that they are going through. They bring it in, and the truck driver was having to fill out a form online that was taking most of the time. Once they did the form, they would have a sample test taken, then they would weigh the truck, then they would actually scale the operation, then they do a checkout and they would leave. Well, fortunately, this one made it easy because the very first step was the step that was holding back. So we got everybody together and said, how can we improve this process for the truck driver? What's causing them to hold back? Well, in those days, the truck drivers weren't really computer savvy. And they were trying to fill out a government form online, and some of them didn't even have personal computers at the time. None of them had cell phones. And so what we had to do was come up with a way to quickly remedy that. So what we did is we subordinated and have people who weren't doing anything come over, ask the truck driver questions, and enter the information. We almost got all the trucks off the road just by doing that. So we hadn't even got to elevate. So we subordinated by having those who were not busy coming to help with that system. Once they did that, begin to break it up, somebody came up with the idea of using the scanner. So they put a serial scanner bar on everything, this code, and then the truck driver would come in. There would be a serial scanner. They'd run it across the bottom of a form. The truck driver would have been issued, and they were in at about 3 seconds. Well, once they did that, then the next constraint they found was where they were having to unload and load the logs back on for the scaling operation. So is that kind of a picture of it?
Yeah, no, that's
and we drove through, and there were no logging trucks on the road still, and that was 15 years ago. So I was happy. So
good sign. Good sign. This is your chance, guys. Is there any questions that you have for Paul? I know that, again, this is it comes out of a manufacturing background, but when we start talking about organizational assessment, I think there's some nuggets that we can take, and Paul's kind of an expert on this. So any questions that you have for him, maybe contextually, and what something you're working on?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really like the presentation. Now, the way I'm hearing the 5 steps and identifying the constraints, it sounds like from the whole cycle, from the whole list of steps, there may be one, constraint in the whole cycle. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm asking, I'm creating a scenario here. How about if there are multiple constraints? How about if, the whole system really requires an overhaul? A lot of changes require.
That's a good question. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Didn't interrupt.
Yeah. I want to say, and sometimes maybe it is going to be costly. Maybe there is resources needed, infrastructure, technology, equipment, materials, human resource. Like, how about if that is the situation? Multiple constraints.
Sure, that's a really good question. So it's really hard when you see that, because you see all of these things that need to be fixed. So you have to come up with one of two ways. If it's measurable, you measure to find out which one is holding up the most time, or costing the most money, or is demanding the most resources, whatever. And you're going to find that one area. Sometimes you'll have them tied. You'll have two areas you could go to work on. And then what you want to do is you want to pick the low fruit. You want to go to the easiest constraint you can fix immediately, because you want to win. You want to have some kind of win for your team right off the bat. And so I'll be honest with you, I rarely measure. I think usually I can go out and you can kind of tell. In our training manual, I say, always look for WIP in front of the process. If you have one person who's totally overwhelmed, I can tell you that's the constraint, because they're probably overwhelmed because everything's backed up and pressured on them. And then another way to look at it is, if the person downstream from them is out smoking a cigarette, they probably are not the constraint. They're probably after the constraint. I mean, not saying everybody here smokes, but that would be an example. So you have to identify, which one do I want to work on first? Usually it'll pop out as, wow, this is the one that's backed up the most. And that's usually where you want to start. And you want to start by exploiting. So maybe you can't afford software yet, but could you find a way to maybe clean up the computer, or have a couple people working on it at once? Different ways of coming up, creative ways to do it. So that you always want to stick with one, because no system is ever totally balanced. There's always something that's pulling it, and so you want to find that one area that needs the most work. Who else said it? Was it Tim? Do you have a question?
Oh, I don't have, I guess, a specific question. What I really like, and what's going to be super helpful, is these questions here, along with the 5-step process, and in the context of the book, to do our work. So I really like having these questions to say how does it apply in a specific situation that we're working in. So it's more of a comment than anything else, but the questions here are going to be very helpful.
Good to hear.
Anyone else?
Hubert, can I just tag on to the question you had too? And I would say, even let's back it up a step. The first step you want to take is to draw a series of boxes for those processes. And you laid out a really good process. Then it gives you a better idea of where to look at, because if you try to change the entire system at once, it's like trying to lift the world, you know. So by having those, then even if you're wrong, even if you pick the wrong constraint, I got news for you. You're still going to get improvement if you get a bunch of people thinking about a way to improve something. It always works if they're focused on that one thing. But look at the one you think, man, I think we could get the most wins from exploiting this constraint. I think that's where you're going to find the best buyback. So.
Good. Well, Paul, can I just say thank you so much for jumping in and sharing this. I've used it. I'm nowhere near the expert that Paul is in it, but I've seen the benefits of it, and I would encourage you guys to spend some time with it and let some of these concepts begin to breathe in your context and see how you might be able to use some of those.
And Jeremy actually teaches this too, so that's just a little bit of a misnomer. He knows what he's doing, so that's good.
I appreciate that. Lastly, I just want to draw your attention and remind you. So the book that you're going to be reading for next week, I sent an email to you last night with a couple of YouTube clips from Todd Bolsinger. He's from Fuller Theological Seminary. This is going to be one of the books that's really going to be, you're going to have to really try to pull some stuff out for those of you that aren't in a church context on adaptive leadership. But I think it's one of the best books I've ever read on adaptive leadership, because he explains in a real simple format what adaptive leadership is. And I find that to be really, really helpful in just kind of looking at what do we mean by adaptive leadership. So next week in the Zoom room, I'm going to share a little bit on the concept of adaptive leadership, talk a little bit about it, and then you're going to hear from a pastor in our community who has taken that book to heart and how it's kind of changed his church. And so I just want you to be thinking a little bit about what's your concept of adaptive leadership. How have you seen it? Do you use it? And if you do use it, what does it actually mean to you? And then we'll look at it from Dr. Bolsinger's side of things. And then you'll hear, as I said, from a practitioner, Trevor, who he's been pastoring the church for about 5 years. There are about 1,600 people on a weekend. But he stepped in from a founding pastor and is a very different leader. And so he's having to adapt his leadership style from a founding pastor who was a very driven leader, and he's very different. So I just want you guys to be kind of aware of what's happening next week, because you may have to do a little bit more pulling into your context of what some of that looks like. So any questions from any of you before we call it good? It's 11:25 right now. Paul, we're looking at your screen, by the way, so don't open any emails you don't want us to see this moment. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions or concerns, thank you guys for your involvement this week, and continue. Thank you for your work in the discussion forums and in the journaling. You guys are doing a great job, and it's a pleasure and a joy to be able to read what you guys are working on. So I'm excited, and we'll see you next Monday. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.